Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today I'm reviewing the second 27-inch 4K OLED gaming monitor to arrive at my office, the MSI MPG 272URX. This display is quite similar to the Asus ROG Swift PG27U CDM that I reviewed a few weeks back, as it uses the exact same 27-inch 4K 240Hz QD-OLED panel from Samsung Display. How does it compare to the Asus variant? Well, let's find out. From a specification standpoint, there are no major differences between the two models, and MSI are equipping the 272URX with all the basics you'd expect. While Asus claim this is a 4th generation panel, MSI are using Gen 3 branding. It doesn't really make much of a difference, and personally, I believe the hardware is more in line with other 3rd gen panels. Both models are coming in at the same $1,100 US MSRP, at least based on what MSI told us at CES. The design and build is very similar to MSI's previous 32-inch 4K QD-OLED, except scaled down for the new 27-inch panel. The front features the screen with slim bezels on 3 sides and a grey chin with the MSI logo. The back is the usual central box design, which houses all the components, with the thin OLED panel extending outwards from there. MSI use a range of different plastics on the rear and have integrated a small amount of RGB lighting at the top, which is pretty pointless as you can't see it from the front. The overall build quality of the 272URX is fine, but not quite as good as the Asus model in my opinion, and it lacks a bit of that premium touch you'd expect from a $1,000 product. That said, the stand is sturdy, functional, and packs a decent range of ergonomic control, including height, tilt, swivel, and pivot adjustment. The base is relatively flat, so you can put things on it. Also, there's no active cooling in this design, similar to other MSI QD-OLEDs. In 2025, it looks like we'll be getting many more DisplayPort 2.1 monitors, and the 272URX is no exception, packing a DP 2.1 UHBR20 port that allows for the full 4K 240Hz without DSC, provided you have a compatible graphics card like the GeForce 50 series. It's also backwards compatible through DP 1.4 with DSC, and really, whether you use DP 2.1 or DP 1.4 functionality, you won't notice a difference in image quality. In addition, we get 2 HDMI 2.1 48 gigabits per second ports, a USB-C supporting DP alt mode and 98 watts of power delivery, and a couple of USB 5 gigabits per second ports in a hub that allows for KVM switch functionality. It's a good port selection that offers everything you'd want now and in the future. The OSD is the same sort of design as previous MSI monitors and includes a similar feature set to their 32-inch OLEDs with no substantial improvements or changes. There's a reasonable range of gaming features in here, crosshairs, shadow boosting, that sort of thing, plus we're continuing to get MSI's strong set of OLED care features, but it lacks some of the more advanced functionality we saw with the PG27U CDM. For example, Asus include a useful OLED anti-flicker feature in their variant, which raises the minimum refresh rate to attempt to combat flicker. MSI doesn't have an alternative to this. The PG27U CDM supports Dolby Vision, the 272URX does not. Asus also integrated a neat proximity sensor feature to turn off the screen when you're not in front of it, helping to minimize burn-in. This is another feature the MSI model doesn't include, and there are no compelling exclusive features MSI have integrated to compensate. The 272URX ends up as the less feature-rich product. One of the best aspects to this new 27-inch 4K QD-OLED panel is its pixel density and resulting text quality. We go from 140 ppi with the 32-inch 4K panels to a little over 160 ppi at 27 inches, representing an 18% increase in density. Relative to 27-inch 1440p QD-OLEDs, it's a whopping 50% increase, which is very noticeable. Yes, a 4K resolution makes a difference at this panel size, especially with an OLED. The pixel structure is basically identical to what we got with the 32-inch panels, so it's still a triangle RGB layout with green on top, red and blue below, and similar proportions for each of the subpixels. The difference is this subpixel structure has been shrunk to provide 166 ppi. What this does is it practically eliminates the slight text artifacts we see with 32-inch QD-OLED panels and gives us identical text clarity to a 27-inch 4K LCD. With those 32-inch 4K QD-OLEDs, I thought text clarity was very good, but ultimately found it wasn't quite identical to 32-inch 4K LCDs. 27-inch 4K QD-OLED is a step better, and I'm comfortable calling this identical to LCD. I couldn't really see any color fringing around text at all, even at a very close distance with 100% display scaling. This is now a solved problem, and the gains relative to 1440p QD-OLED are substantial in terms of how text artifacts are reduced and eliminated. This new panel is fantastic at rendering text. What hasn't really been improved is the screen coding and panel composition. The way this panel handles reflections and looks a bit grey in brighter environments appears the same as with the 32-inch QD-OLEDs, so the same issues from past reviews remain with these new 27-inch 4K variants. In brighter environments where light sources are in front of the display, the panel has a tendency to reflect ambient light, raising blacks to the point where they appear somewhat grey. This impacts one of the key selling points to getting an OLED, which is its deep blacks. They just won't be that rich or deep in brighter conditions, especially relative to glossy WOLED panels. General reflection handling is very decent, so mirror-like reflections aren't too bad, though being a glossy panel there's always going to be some amount of visible defined reflections, which get worse the brighter the conditions are. However, the issues with the coding can be minimized by optimizing the placement of light sources in the room so that lights are behind the display. The darker the environment, such as gaming in a dim or fully dark room, the better this QD-OLED panel looks, and in dim conditions you will typically get a rich, deep OLED black experience. It's really hard to say whether this will be an issue for you, as it can be a case-by-case basis. Personally, I do find it annoying and one of the larger issues with QD-OLED panels, but if you primarily game at night, it's not anywhere near as much of a concern. At the very least, it's something to be aware of. What's also important to be aware of is that OLEDs generally aren't great monitors for desktop usage, productivity apps, and web browsing because they are susceptible to permanent burn-in. It's nice that this 27-inch 4K OLED has great text quality for desktop work, but it's not immune to burn-in. Anything with static content like toolbars or icons on screen for a long period of time, like you get with most desktop applications, is at risk of burning in. Conversely, dynamic content like gaming or watching videos is at practically no risk of burn-in, so don't worry about this if you're primarily using an OLED for gaming. Even the occasional bit of desktop app usage is fine. It's more 8 hours a day of productivity work that may lead to burn-in, as we've found from our ongoing burn-in series right here on Monitors Unboxed. Response time performance is excellent on this 4K QD-OLED monitor, as it is for other OLED displays that we've tested so far. OLED offers lightning fast response times around the 0.3 millisecond mark at its maximum 240Hz refresh rate, and that leads to fantastic motion clarity. OLEDs also maintain the same performance at all refresh rates, so even when testing at 120 or 60Hz, we see similar results in the 0.3 millisecond range. This is a nice benefit for variable refresh rate gamers that results in a single overdrive mode experience. In contrast, many LCDs typically perform worse at lower refresh rates relative to their maximum refresh. On OLED monitors, the main limiting factor is the refresh rate itself. This means that on two OLEDs running at the same refresh rate, you'll get the same level of motion clarity, which is important when comparing across models. For example, if you have a 240Hz 4K QD-OLED running at 120Hz and a 360Hz 1440p QD-OLED running at 120Hz, both will produce the same motion clarity. You'll only see better motion clarity on higher refresh rate OLEDs when gaming at frame rates above 240 FPS, the maximum refresh the 272URX supports. If you don't expect to be playing games above 240 FPS, then there is no practical advantage to a higher refresh rate OLED in terms of motion performance. There is effectively no difference in response time performance between this QD-OLED and other OLED monitors, including WOLED variants. OLEDs are much faster than even the fastest LCDs I've tested, and this is true whether we look at the best performance or average performance across the refresh rate range. Not only are OLEDs fast, they also have no overshoot artifacts, which can be an issue with some LCD models. When viewing cumulative deviation, we can see that OLEDs get much closer to ideal response time behavior, and in most cases offer performance an order of magnitude better in this metric than LCDs. In practice, this leads to around a 1.5 times advantage in clarity at a given refresh rate. So 240Hz QD-OLEDs offer a similar experience to 360Hz LCDs, speed that isn't currently available from an LCD at this resolution. Input latency is excellent, offering a 0.1 millisecond processing delay in both the SDR and HDR modes. Combined with fast response times and a decent refresh rate, this OLED feels very snappy to use, only beaten by the absolute highest refresh rate models on the market. Despite its high resolution, I think this is still a great option for multiplayer gaming because the refresh rate is high and total lag is low. There's not a lot new to say about the 272URX's power consumption. It's roughly the same as the PG27U CDM and other 27-inch size QD-OLED monitors. This means that relative to the 32-inch 4K models, we're seeing about a 33% reduction in power from a panel that is 29% smaller in area. WOLEDs still retain an advantage for white content due to their additional white subpixel, but the difference between the technologies is much smaller in mixed content. Compared to a 27-inch 4K LCD, we're looking at 2 to 3 times the power consumption in a worst-case scenario. All QD-OLEDs that we've tested so far offer a similar color space. In the case of the 272URX, we're looking at 98.1% DCI-P3 coverage, as well as 96% Adobe RGB coverage, strong results for viewing HDR content or working in those color spaces. In total, I saw 76.4% coverage of Rec 2020, which is slightly lower than some of the other QD-OLEDs I've tested, but still great for a gaming monitor. Factory color performance is very good. In grayscale, the monitor produces a near perfect color temperature, and gamma performance is solid, resulting in a Delta E ITP of 6. There are the usual concerns around oversaturation, as this display does not use an sRGB gamut clamp out of the box. This sort of performance is comparable to the PG27U CDM in its factory configuration, and it sits somewhere in the middle of our comparison charts. New for 2025, we'll be testing the performance of monitors when using Windows Auto Color Management feature introduced in Windows 11 24H2. This feature color manages the display at a system level by using the color data the monitor reports. On wide gamut monitors, this allows SDR sRGB content to be displayed more accurately without the use of a monitor's sRGB mode, as the color space emulation is performed by Windows instead of the monitor. It also allows you to avoid any sRGB mode restrictions, like locked white balance, because the monitor remains in its standard configuration with full setting control. When enabling auto color management, aka ACM, the 272URX is quite accurate. Grayscale performance is similar, but the color metrics are much improved. Saturation Delta E performance improves to 3.13 on average, and color checker improves to 3.97, so this display has great factory calibration in this configuration. It's also a good way to use the 272URX in general, because the built-in sRGB mode locks various settings like white balance, whereas when using ACM, you retain full control. The sRGB mode is still useful though, because some input devices may not support color management. The sRGB mode also produces stronger grayscale accuracy and even better delta E's in the color metrics than what you achieve using ACM at the expense of lock settings. MSI have done a great job calibrating this mode. Compared to other monitors, the 272URX is one of the better calibrated products, though this is also the case for most QD-OLEDs that I've tested. While the results here are exceptional, it somehow still gets beaten marginally by the PG27U CDM, so both are very well calibrated products. Performing a full calibration on this monitor isn't a necessity due to its out-of-the-box performance. I just use the sRGB mode or ACM. There is no difference in SDR brightness between the 272URX and other OLED monitors. Full screen white tops out at 255 nits, which is identical to the Asus model. This level of brightness is still sufficient for most indoor use cases, but obviously it's not as bright as today's LCDs. Also, MSI use a uniform brightness configuration in the SDR mode, so you don't need to worry about the brightness of the display changing as you resize windows. Minimum brightness is solid at 34 nits. I was very impressed with the viewing angles of this panel. They are very wide, which makes it easy to view the display even at quite extreme angles. It really looks excellent. This also means that there is a large sweet spot for viewing this QD-OLED, and you won't notice issues like the edges being slightly lower contrast or a bit washed out, which can be an issue with some flat LCD panels, particularly VAs. Uniformity was also very good with my unit, nice and uniform, viewing full white, and no dirty screen effect viewing dark greys. This is keeping QD-OLED in the leadership position for display uniformity among OLEDs. The MSI MPG 272URX is well suited to HDR from a hardware perspective. OLED panels, including QD-OLED, directly emit light and have individual pixel control, which makes them ideal for displaying HDR content. This feature allows each pixel to independently vary from fully switching off to displaying bright highlights, giving us deep zero-level blacks and per-pixel local dimming. The level of control OLEDs provide minimizes blooming in high-contrast scenarios and allows for clean distinction between bright and dark areas that are close together. Compared to LCDs with a multi-zone backlight, OLEDs have far fewer ugly illumination artifacts, which are most noticeable when displaying difficult scenarios like star fields or subtitles, and there are no zone transitions as bright objects move around the display. With per-pixel control as its main advantage, OLEDs are best at displaying high-contrast scenes with rich shadow detail, which is a key aspect to a good HDR presentation. Darker content interspersed with dazzling bright highlights brings out the best in OLED displays, as does HDR content with fast motion. For gamers especially, input latency on most OLEDs is low in the HDR mode. The weakness to the HDR presentation on an OLED is overall brightness. While peak brightness can be high in the best cases, full screen brightness is low, and this limits the punch in bright daytime scenes. LCDs may not have per-pixel control, but zoned backlights can simply get significantly brighter in bright scenes. Depending on what you want out of an HDR monitor, your preference could swing more towards LCDs or more towards OLEDs, but typically speaking, OLEDs are a great choice that deliver a fantastic HDR presentation. One of the things that surprised me about the HDR configurations available on the 272URX is that the supposed fix that MSI introduced through a firmware update on other QD-OLEDs is actually not available on the 272URX at launch. At least this was the case with firmware 008 that shipped on my unit, and as of now there are no firmware updates on the MSI website. So if you recently saw my video on MSI's QD-OLED firmware updates, which aren't that useful but are interesting nonetheless, you actually don't get that experience on the new 27-inch 4K model. So basically, MSI are offering a classic QD-OLED experience in terms of HDR modes. There's the True Black 400 mode and the Peak 1000 nit mode. These operate in the same way as other QD-OLED monitors. The True Black 400 mode is the most accurate and doesn't have panel dimming in brighter scenes, but peak brightness is capped at 450 nits. The Peak 1000 nit mode removes the brightness cap and peak brightness now hits 1000 nits, but there is panel dimming in brighter, high APL scenes, and this impacts accuracy. The only somewhat unusual result I saw is that the True Black 400 mode isn't quite as accurate as I've seen from this mode on other monitors, which usually have perfect EOTF tracking. On the 272URX, it has good tracking, but roll-off occurs a bit earlier than expected. The Peak 1000 mode is very accurate for darker, lower APL content, as we can see from the 2% window result, but there is noticeable panel dimming in brighter content, as seen from the 10% APL 50 result. There are no other available configurations, so the 272URX does not have the boosted brightness mode that we're seeing now from a few other vendors like Gigabyte and Asus. That mode also isn't the best given it has issues with making dark content brighter than it should be, but some people like that option and will be disappointed it's not available on the MSI model. But the bigger issue, and the same issue as with other QD-OLEDs, is the lack of a single HDR setting that delivers an accurate experience in all conditions. This doesn't make the 272URX unusable for HDR, it's just not optimally configured, and to get the best experience you'll need to change HDR modes depending on whether you are playing mostly brighter or mostly darker content, or if you want to optimize for either of those conditions. It's a stunning HDR experience most of the time, could have done with a bit more work though. HDR brightness is identical to other QD-OLED monitors. In these charts, other monitors are listed using their brightest configuration that preserves accuracy, and you'll see basically no difference at various window sizes. Right now, the best W OLED panels get around 15% brighter at a 2% window, which is not a significant difference. And in this chart, we can confirm brightness versus window size performance is the same as MSI's larger 32-inch variants. In real scene brightness, we're not seeing anything different to past QD-OLED panels. QD-OLEDs, especially in some configurations, have great brightness in low APL scenes when needing to display small elements like lightning, street lights, or stars. Mid-APL content is similar to other OLEDs, and then high APL content is where this technology struggles. Generally today, the best W OLED panels get a little brighter on average and don't suffer from panel dimming in brighter scenes, but as of today, there are no 27-inch 4K W OLED panels in direct competition with this QD-OLED. LCD monitors with local dimming are unsurprisingly at the top of the chart. Lastly, we can compare HDR calibration. The 272URX is good in the tested configurations, especially the Peak 1000 nits mode when viewing darker content, though the True Black 400 mode isn't as strong as some other models. Then for HDR color volume, we see great results in line with other QD-OLED monitors, provided you are using the settings that enable the highest levels of brightness. Final section of the review is the Hub Essentials checklist. MSI does a great job of advertising this monitor, outside of the usual concerns around misleading response time numbers. In the feature support matrix for 2025, I've added a new criteria for HDR panel dimming, which the 272URX does not pass. Outside of that, this monitor has a strong feature set, including stuff like a KVM switch, good USB-C functionality, and low input lag. It misses things like Dolby Vision support and black frame insertion. At the end of the day, the MSI MPG 272URX is another great QD-OLED gaming monitor that's delivering the same sort of experience we've come to love at the high end. As I said in my first review of a 27-inch 4K QD-OLED, this isn't a revolutionary step for OLED monitors, as it's basically just a shrunk down version of the 32-inch panel, but it's a format that needed to be made given the popularity of 27-inch screens. The increased pixel density of 27-inch 4K OLED basically eliminates any lingering artifacts related to the subpixel structure and text rendering, delivering the best text quality I've seen from desktop OLED so far. This is truly equivalent to a 27-inch 4K LCD. Of course, with the panel being smaller than the 32-inch models, it's not quite as immersive for gaming, so I still prefer the 32-inch size, but this 27-inch panel definitely looks super sharp and clear. In addition, we get all the usual benefits of OLED technology. Combining a 240Hz refresh rate with super fast response times leads to elite motion clarity. There's benefits for all types of gamer here because competitive or faster paced games look great at 4K 240Hz, while single player titles also benefit from the combination of a high resolution, fast transition times, and true HDR. Deep blacks, per pixel dimming, bright highlights, and generally good tuning from MSI delivers stunning visuals across the board. Unfortunately, this new 27-inch panel doesn't resolve some of the issues with QD-OLED technology though, such as raised blacks in brighter environments due to the panel composition, and panel dimming in brighter HDR scenes. And of course, there's the risk of permanent burn-in that limits this display's usability for desktop apps and productivity, despite its excellent pixel density and 3-year burn-in warranty. For improvements in these areas, we'll just have to wait for a future OLED generation. The question right now is whether you should buy the MSI model or the ASUS model if you're interested in a 27-inch 4K 240Hz OLED. Also noting there are other variants to come shortly, such as the Dell Alienware AW2725Q. In my opinion, the ASUS PG27U CDM is clearly better, and it gets there through useful features like OLED anti-flicker, the proximity sensor, boosted brightness HDR configuration, and Dolby Vision support. Performance in general is basically identical in most situations, but the extra features you get with the ASUS model cement it as the better choice. With both the PG27U CDM and 272URX coming in at the same $1,100 US price point, I would just pick the ASUS model. In my opinion, the MSI variant needs to be at least $100 cheaper to consider buying it based on the gap in features, and honestly, the price here makes little sense compared to MSI's 32-inch QD OLEDs. Personally, I would not buy the smaller 272URX for $1,100 when I could buy the larger 321URX for $950, so perhaps the 272URX actually needs to be more like $900 US. Also, the aforementioned AW2725Q from Dell has been announced at $900 US with a launch date in March. I'd probably just wait to see what that model offers, given it's quite a bit cheaper than either the ASUS or MSI variants. Again, the MSI model isn't bad or anything, it's actually quite a good monitor, it just needs a bit of work to get the price into a position where it makes sense to buy. Anyway, that's it for this review of the MSI MPG 272URX. If you like the independent testing and work that we do here at Monitors Unboxed, then please do consider supporting us via our Patreon page. Links to that is in the description below. If you sign up, you'll get access to some pretty cool benefits. We've got our calibrated settings and ICC profiles for monitors, Discord chat, great place to chat about monitors and that sort of thing, monthly live streams, BTS content as well. Also, you can pick up an OLED shirt if you're interested in that, supports the channel as well. So yeah, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.